This week, 10 states will vote on abortion on Election Day. The Lion talks to an OBGYN who says most of what you're hearing about these amendments is baseless fear-mongering. A new UN report says hundreds of women around the world have been robbed of opportunities by biological males. And a researcher accused of hiding negative findings on the use of puberty blockers in children. These stories and plenty more on deck this week on The Lion Week in Review. Welcome into this week's edition of The Lion Week in Review. It's a weekly look at the culture, the courts, your state capital, and your kids. I'm Chris Stegall. Now, let's meet our panel, some of the men and women behind the stories at ReadLion.com. Josh Mann is our managing editor. Michael Ryan, our executive editor, and Valerie Cabana is a media contributor here at The Lion. Welcome to you all, panel, as we dive into the headlines this week. Valerie, we start with you. 10 states, 10, this election cycle have the issue of abortion on the ballot. What do you know?
Yeah, and a lot of people are maybe not pro-abortion. They're maybe not pro-choice, but they've been misinformed, and so they're going to be voting for abortion to be legal in these states. And so we covered this story in an article with a certified OBGYN who talks about the actual practices that happen in a hospital room. When the actual emergencies happen where moms' lives are put in danger, what actually happens and how so many things that are being conveyed in the media right now are actually deceitful and just simply untrue. So I'd really encourage you guys to go check out this article. She talks about how women need to know that every state in this country allows physicians to intervene to immediate threats, miscarriage, ectopic pregnancy, complications if you did have an abortion, and other potential life-threatening pregnancy complications. They are allowed to treat those. All 50 states have laws that protect the mother. And it's really important to look at these things and understand what is true and what is untrue, and stop with the fear-mongering. Every physician is allowed to treat. There are ads right now that are happening that say you'll go to jail if you treat stuff like an ectopic pregnancy. But like I've said over and over and over again, that's not true, and they are deceiving you. So please go do your own research and check out this article.
You know, Michael, one of the things, at least I can speak to the Missouri amendment because that's the one we know most closely to our own backyard. It's not just the issue of abortion that's looped in on this particular amendment, at least in one state, Missouri.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a broadly worded amendment that it might include, say, transgender treatments and surgeries for kids, which are expressly outlawed in Missouri law. On the Kansas side, the first post-Roe vote on abortion happened in 2022, and the lies were just flowing like fall leaves in a windstorm. It was just unbelievable, the lies that were being told. This amendment in Kansas would have expressly allowed the legislature to regulate abortion, and that was necessary because the Supreme Court in Kansas had called that into question. Well, the pro-choice forces came into the state and said, well, it's going to outlaw abortion, which is patently untrue. They also said that there was no need for the amendment because they already had regulations on abortion in Kansas. Well, the pro-choice forces were already trying to kill those regulations, and after the amendment passed, are actually getting that done in courts.
Josh, we know that this issue in the midterms 2022 had an outsized impact on many races. Democrats really had a very vocal say in 2022. Now, with this being a presidential election year, I spoke with a politician just before this show today and said, what kind of impact do you think this will have on Republican and Democrats in their respective presidential races, congressional races? That remains to be seen, I guess.
Yeah, I think it does. And, you know, initially, I think some of the polling was suggesting, at least from the pro-life perspective, some pretty meager support or opposition to the amendments, which are pro-abortion amendments. But actually, it seems like maybe the tide's turning a little bit. I think people are wising up to the exaggerations and the blatant lies, as one of our articles, this OBGYN calls them blatant lies. She says they're blatant lies, and that elective abortion, she says, does not improve women's health. and many times actively worsens it. And so I think people are wising up, but still it's going to be close, and we'll just have to see, when all of the election results come out, hopefully not too long after the election, just how the exit polls kind of look.
Michael, headed over to Kansas. You were just mentioning the state a little while ago. There's a county out there wrapping their loving arms around drag shows and tampons in men's restrooms, much like the vice presidential candidate Tim Walz has embraced in Minnesota. What do you know?
Well, Chris, I know that we're not in Kansas anymore. This is proof positive that the culture war is being fought at every single level of government. So there's a county commissioner in Johnson County, Kansas, which is basically a suburb of Kansas City. She's calling out her colleagues on the county commission for having promoted a quote-unquote family-friendly drag show this year that included, apparently, a coloring contest and everything. One of her county commission colleagues was indeed appalled, not at the drag show with the kids, but at the criticism of it. And this is in a historically red county, the biggest in Kansas, in red Kansas, no less. It's now being governed, it seems, by a county commission that's pretty far left. And so she's calling them out now prior to the election because voters have a chance to change the ideology on the county commission. But the question is, do voters and parents really know what's going on?
Yeah, it's Josh. That's the question of the year, I guess, is how closely are people paying attention to things like this?
That's right. And, I think the two commissioners' perspectives in the story are so in contrast. And I think it's really, these are contrasting perspectives that reflect America as well. O'Hara calls the drag shows for kids debauchery advertised to children. But the other commissioner, Commissioner Allenbrand, said, it's a large group of people, hundreds of people that got together to celebrate what they believe in. Now, which is it? And I think the bottom line is parents need to know what's going on. They need to understand what these events are. And I think that we have to be looking out for the best interest of children. We do this in a lot of different ways in society. We restrict the kinds of content they consume online, in movies, the kinds of drugs they can intake. And so parents need to be aware, and I think it's actually a common sense issue, and a lot more people are kind of wising up to the sexualization that's happening in these kinds of shows. And so we'll just have to continue to watch it and report what we find.
Valerie, there's another story at readline.com. It's sort of an adjacent story, and that's the issue of men and women's sports. A UN report, of all places, a UN report talking about the number of women who have missed out on championship opportunities, medals, and placing in sports because of men participating in women's sports, which is interesting, and also given what Josh was just talking about. They say that these issues will really perhaps be sleeper issues in this coming election, that there are more Americans talking about this issue and thinking about it than maybe even the candidates are paying attention.
Yeah, we've seen that the candidates actually haven't paid a lot of attention to it at all because they know that it's such a far left ideological topic that they know that it will crush the election because people in their right minds do not agree with men being in women's sports. And so this article from the UN that we covered, also just a point, they've been ahead on this transgender issue. They have been ahead from the beginning, and they're still ahead of us, and we're really falling behind. But over 600 female athletes in over 400 competitions have lost more than 890 medals in 29 different sports to biological men competing in their sports. This issue is particularly important to me, and it's personal because I was a female athlete that competed in female-only sports. I couldn't imagine being a back row volleyball player and a man spiking the ball on me. That's not fair, and it's dangerous for women. This is not about equality. This is about justice for women. This is about making sure that women have their right to participate in sports that we worked so hard for. And just to put men in women's sports, it's dangerous, and it is tomfoolery.
It's an interesting thing, Valerie. I'll stay with you for this in a minute because as we talked about abortion a minute ago and this issue, simultaneously these issues are kind of happening. culturally, and where women come down on it is really interesting to me, because I've seen some women who traditionally vote pretty left of center on most issues agree with you wholeheartedly on what you just said about the trans issue, but maybe they're pro-abortion. Which issue, I guess, wins out in this culture war right now with women, do you think?
Well, I think, unfortunately, it's because of the way that these abortion bills and legislation are being worded. It's because they're being deceived to believing that if they were in a situation and they were pregnant, that they wouldn't be able to get life-saving treatment if something happened to them. And they put it up for grabs as, oh, well, as the mother, I'm only going to be able to get life-saving treatment if abortion is legal in my state. And that is simply false. And that's something that we're trying to bring awareness to, Chris, because it is extremely important that we know this.
Sleeper issue, this trans issue, how big a deal you think this is? I've heard some pundits say, including people like Riley Gaines, that maybe this is something that's going to be a bigger deal on Election Day, this issue generally, than maybe we know.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think a lot of people are quietly going to vote certain ways because you get into trouble socially if you say much about this out there in social media and so forth. It is interesting that it comes from the UN. This is not a right-wing organization saying this. And the title of their report is Violence Against Women and Girls in Sports. And in it, they say that we've done a replacement of the female sports category with a mixed sex category, which is really strong wording.
I stay with you, Michael, on the next story, which is the puberty blocker issue. We have found out in Europe, we mentioned the UN, Europeans have largely abandoned this notion of puberty blockers, at least for minors. And now some new research out there that has been uncovered that was previously hidden.
Uncovered is the word. So this researcher, Dr. Johanna Olson Kennedy, sat on the results of this NIH-funded study on puberty blockers and basically mental health. And she sat on it, apparently, because she didn't get the findings she wanted. The findings found that there was no improvement in mental health when minors used puberty blockers. And really, the mental health angle is the main argument for their use. As one expert put it, it's not her prerogative to decide based on the results that she will or won't publish them. So which is it? Follow the science or follow the politics? She claimed later that, these kids were okay mentally going in, but that's not true. What's true is that 25% at least of the kids going into this study did express mental health problems.
It's interesting, Josh. Megyn Kelly, the prolific talk show host, she was recently on Bill Maher's show, in fact, just about a week ago, and she said that this issue with children, puberty blockers, surgical alterations of children's bodies, this is the kind of the moral issue of our time. I mean, she really believes this. And even people like Bill Maher, who are to her left, seem to agree. I don't know. It seems like there's something happening out there. There's a moral outrage that I think most people share regardless of their politics.
I agree, and I think we've seen it in polls which show a majority of Americans think that this is foolish. We have research now suggesting that most children who experience gender dysphoria actually grow out of it. So you've got 12 to 14-year-olds who feel like they're in the wrong body. I mean, most people, when they went through middle school, didn't love what was happening to their body. And it doesn't mean they all had gender dysphoria, but a lot of kids at this age do experience different kinds of dysphorias such as that. And they often grow out of it through adolescence. I mean, so let's push the pause button at least. And then, if you want to make a libertarian argument that adults should be able to do what adults want, that's a different thing. But we're talking about minors here. With this researcher, one of the things that's interesting is that they had an NIH grant of around $10 million for this research. So there was also this public interest angle. A government agency essentially funded the research that she sat on. And so I feel like it's sort of doubly bad or corrupt in that sense.
Josh, we stay with you on another story at readline.com. One of the most important issues that we cover at readline.com is religious liberty issues, and you have just such a story out of South Carolina.
Yes, this man, Ernest Giardino, for 8 months was displaying signs. He would hold signs on a public sidewalk that said things such as, "Trust Christ, he paid the price." Simple Christian evangelism. But then after about 8 months, suddenly an officer approached him and says, "You're going to need a permit in order to hold that sign." And so he went to the city, apparently got the permit, but it would only allow him to hold the sign for 30 minutes. And so he has some legal representation now. It hasn't reached the point of a lawsuit, but First Liberty, his legal representatives, have issued a letter to the mayor and to the city. They say it's unconstitutional. It's a free speech issue. It's a First Amendment issue, and that Ernest, because of the First Amendment, ought to be able to hold a sign expressing his views on a public sidewalk. And it seems like to me it seems like a slam dunk case, and it's surprising that we're even the city's even gone to that length to kind of shut him down.
Yeah, this too, Valerie, is a issue that the Trump campaign anyway has embraced, and just back to the last week they've been talking about issues of religious liberty. A significant political issue, do you believe?
I think that it all comes down to the issue of censorship. And in this election, one side is voting for censorship and the other is not. And we believe in freedom of speech and the freedom to express our own religious liberty. And I would ask the question, if this was something else, if it wasn't Christian values being shared, would the same thing have happened? My guess is probably not. Now, I don't know for sure, but this is a crucial issue, and if they're starting to take away those freedoms, but claiming that other freedoms are more important, then we're going in the completely wrong direction.
Michael, you have written about this recently. They just did a movie about the famous praying coach that won a religious liberty case before the Supreme Court. How is this trending out there? Is this still culturally a big problem in the United States? Are people voting accordingly, or do you feel like those in favor of religious liberty are winning?
Well, I agree with Josh. I think a lot of these cases are slam dunks, but the fact that you have to slam dunk it is a cause for concern. You know, this is in a deep red state, South Carolina, that we're talking about here. And religious liberty is kind of why we have in America. It just seems kind of strange that people would be doing this. But eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, and the fight for freedom is never done. As First Liberty put it, no one needs the government's permission to express their faith in public. The First Amendment is his permit.
One of the things we know well, if you pay attention to international issues, that is China and nations like Iran. Josh, when you talk about hospitality to Christians, they're not known as terribly hospitable. And you write this week at readline.com about looking at a serious alliance between these two going forward, perhaps.
Yeah, there's growing concern among some in the international community, especially those who are watching Christian persecution and sort of track these things, that as that alliance between China and Iran grows, that Christian persecution is also going to worsen. And so each of these countries has a pretty poor track record when it comes to their treatment of Christians. And so these nations are meeting now, and they're both part now of what's called the BRICS nations, BRICS. Originally that comprised Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, but now Iran and 4 others have joined. This is the first year. The 10 of them have been together. And so that was kind of the impetus for basically a Christian group, kind of a watchdog, to issue this report and kind of raise these red flags.
Well, our next show will be post-election, so it'll be interesting to get back together to talk about what shook out on Election Day. But until then, we always like to go around the horn and ask the panel their favorite stories of the week. Michael, we start with you.
Well, I like to make that last story my favorite because I'm not a real big fan of Christian persecution, but it's an important issue. It's the most underreported story in the world, and it just seems like speech and religion are in a losing race, neck and neck, for freedom.
Valerie?
We have a story that's coming out today, and it is about Hurricane Helene. Now, I know that this was a month ago at this point, but it is still too soon to forget about what happened. And so we're bringing awareness to this story. We're talking to a local Asheville resident who talks about the aftermath of what happened in Hurricane Helene. and how people are leaving the mountains where they lived. They're abandoning everything. They're finding a way to get to the polls. They're voting early, and then they're leaving their entire lives behind because everything that they have was destroyed. It's a really important story. It's something that's being so overlooked by the media, and we're covering it on The Lion. So check it out.
Incredible. And very important. You're exactly right. Too early to forget those folks. We should never, but certainly not just a few weeks after the event. Josh, your favorite story this week?
Yeah, these stories about the abortion amendments are so important, and I think it's worth doubling down on our recommendation that our audience do their research, and when you hear this kind of rhetoric and these wild claims, that you double check those things and be sure that you're listening to actual OBGYNs who are saying, no, we do care about the life of the mother, and that these so-called abortion bans don't put those mothers' lives at risk at all.
Panel, thank you. Truth in reporting, the full story, that's what you get at readlion.com. That'll do it for us this week. We hope you'll keep up to date on all the latest news each and every day at readlion.com. And until next week, thanks for downloading the show.